This week, Kumar and Dana discuss the books that comics journalist Joe Sacco has produced about the decades-long Israel-Palestine conflict. Palestine, originally produced between 1983 and 1985, 2009's Footnotes in Gaza, and last year's War on Gaza. Through these books, we watch the situation there disintegrate, but also watch Sacco's skills as a reporter and storyteller vastly improve. First, I'd like to thank our patrons for helping to keep the show going. You can pitch in by pledging at least $2 a month at patreon.com/deconcomics.
This is Kumar.
This is Dana.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Kumar in Melbourne. Dana is in Fredericton. We've also got Pete Hegseth in Washington. I've added him to the chat. It's not an issue. Fredericton, which I don't usually mention by name, is a population of about 60,000. And I think the Gaza Strip is only about 4 times bigger in terms of physical area than Fredericton, 4 or 5 times, something like that, maybe. I could be wrong about that. We're here to talk about all of Joe Sacco's works on Palestine and the West Bank and Gaza, really 2 big books. Maybe too big because we keep overdoing it when we're planning these episodes. As we mentioned at the beginning, before we started recording, I don't even know how we're going to do this. This might be 30 minutes and Tim has to roll it up with a chat about Scooby-Doo comics, or it might be 3 hours. I'm going to try not to lose my temper and swear a lot. But I'm probably going to say some very stupid shit, some uninformed shit. I'm going to make some gross oversimplifications, probably have some stupid platitudes like hurt people.
Wow. You're not wasting any time.
No, but here we are, 2 guys on a comic book podcast with no real personal stake in this, and we're going to try to make some statements, I guess, about these really full-on comics. And, this is another thing we're talking about. This is ongoing, and we'll kind of talk about that a little bit, too, when we get to the third kind of very short comic, which is called War on Gaza. It's another Joe Sacco comic. But a few weeks ago, I joined Threads, which is like Meta's answer to Twitter. And it's it really, you hear all these conspiracy theories about how if you post something about Trump on Facebook, like Facebook will delete the post. But if you click on a link to Threads from Facebook that's like Trump is an idiot, and you go over to Threads, you just that's what your whole feed is. It's like nonstop. It's just giving you exactly what you want. It's so addictive. But I've been getting it, like, since I started going on to Threads and since we started reading these books, I've been noticing it's just been nonstop Palestine news. Like almost every day, I think I'm like, okay, I'm done. I don't have to mention that on a podcast. And the next day, something else will come up. Mm-hmm. Like I just saw this headline about Israelis putting 15 Palestinian medics in a mass grave. And like yesterday, the Freedom Flotilla had sent a boat over there with relief supplies for Gaza, like humanitarian aid. Supposedly, Greta Thunberg was on this boat. And it's been shot down by drones. Wow. Meanwhile, fuckface Donald Trump is like making literal statements about controlling and owning the Gaza Strip. He's going to call it the Freedom Zone, and he's putting up these AI videos in his whatever he uses of the Gaza Strip as a tourist, like Las Vegas, like with these high rises and beaches and all this crazy shit. And then, I don't know if you know Louis Theroux, the guy who makes the documentaries. He just last week dropped this 1-hour documentary about the occupation of the West Bank. I watched that. I was listening to a podcast, and just by pure coincidence, they were talking about how after the terror attacks in Mumbai in 2005 or 8 or something like that.
Yeah.
Mumbai went to Israel for their surveillance tech and tactics.
Okay.
For their counterterrorism tactics.
Sure.
And gear. They were like, well, how's Israel doing? So they modeled Mumbai's now anti-terrorism apparatus is all modeled after what Israel is using. So this stuff was just hitting me like nonstop.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you're all read up on this stuff and current. It's an interesting contrast to where I'm coming from.
Well, I don't.
A place of pure ignorance.
Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't say I'm in a place of knowledge. The first thing I ever learned about the Middle East or the Israel-Palestine conflict was in 1987 in Mad Magazine. There was this one-page feature by Al Jaffe called the worst jobs in the world. Yeah. And one of them was this guy wearing almost like a spacesuit and these signs that say up the PLO and stuff like that. And the caption was, this is one of the worst jobs in the world, was PR man for the PLO. And I didn't know what that was. It was 1987. Yeah. I went to my dad. I showed him this comic in Mad Magazine. He said, can you explain this to me? He had to explain to me what PR was and what the PLO was when I was 12 years old. So that was kind of it. And then really, most of what I know is from Joe Sacco's Palestine book, which I think is kind of a bad introduction. This has always been the Sacco book that I'm most lukewarm about. And we'll talk about that as we go through it. But another thing was I tried to read up on the origins of how this all came about. I was listening to another podcast. It was actually the same podcast, different guest. And this woman had written a book about the conflict in Kashmir. And she was and the host was saying, well, what's the origin point? And she says well, we like origin points, but there's always something earlier. And that was recorded a few weeks before the 20 tourists were killed there last week. By those terrorists. Anyway, so I was like, wait a second. So I was thinking about, okay, so we've got 1948 is the kind of most people point to as the war between Palestine and Israel. And then we have the flood of hundreds of thousands of refugees flee into the West Bank or Gaza Strip. And I'm like, okay. Then I thought, wait a second. And I was thinking about the Crusades. Okay, we'll go back 1,000 years. So I started looking up the Crusades, and if you look on Wikipedia, every single sentence has 5 hyperlinks in it. And even when you go to the First Crusade, it's well, actually, the Byzantine Empire was starting to take territory in this region, or there's the Ottoman Empire, or all this kind of stuff is all before the Crusades. So you have to even click on these links and go further back, probably going back to Roman times, probably going back to something before that.
Yeah.
So I actually couldn't, I don't have a starting point. I really didn't, there was still a lot of this that I was confused about, even after reading the Palestine book and even after watching the Louis Theroux documentary this week, that I still was not clear on. Because, and we'll talk about this when we get into the books too, but the creators of these documentaries or these comics specifically, and Sacco talks about it all the time in the comic, which is one of the things I love about it, is that he's there to look for conflict. He's not there to look for people living in comfort. He's looking for the worst shit he can find to make a comic about it. And he says specifically, I think he needs bang bang for his comic, is the words he uses. At one point. So anyway, I'm still a bit muddled about some stuff. I think Footnotes in Gaza is way better at laying out exactly what happened and why. And I think that's one of the things I loved about his second book, which was Sefer Grajda, because that really was like, okay, here's how this conflict in Bosnia started. Here were the forces. They go through it all almost step by step. And you have a really, even if you have no idea about it, you learn by the end of it, you have some idea of why that conflict shaped the way it did. Palestine's a very different book, and we don't even know why Joe's there, really, for a very long time. Anyway, so I think we're doing this because you picked up Palestine, or you ordered it or something? What was the chain of events here?
I think that Joe Sacco, as a comics journalist, if I can use that term, has been on my radar for a long time, and I'm pretty sure it was a Deconstructing Comics episode that I listened to. I mean, probably 15 years ago. It's hard for me to pin it down exactly when it was, and I don't even clearly remember. I remember talking to you about this more recently, like saying, I don't know if it was an episode about Joe Sacco's, like one of his books, or if it was just like a general comics journalism episode. I'm leaning towards the latter. I think it was like or maybe it was like there were 2 or 3 books that were talked about. But anyway, I got the name Joe Sacco from this episode, whatever it was about. And I was like, that's interesting. I'm interested in that. And I've picked up a few other books of, similar type, like comics journalism. What was the one, the Canadian guy, there was a Canadian guy who, Pyongyang, where was it Guy something? I forget his last name. I was going to say, anyway, Canadian animator, went and lived and worked in North Korea for a while, and made a book about it. So that that kind of thing, and I think there's maybe a few others as well. Weapons of Mass Diplomacy, I think it might be called. Which I think was a French book. About the weapons of mass destruction thing.
I've got a copy of that on my shelf right here.
There it is. So Joe Sacco has kind of been on my wish list for over a decade. And I think it just kind of got to the point where I was looking for something to read and went into the local shop and was like, hey, have you got... I don't know if I asked the guy or I saw it on the shelf, but they happened to have a copy of Palestine. And I picked it up, and I think I mentioned it to you, and you're like, oh yeah, there's also this like follow-up, Footnotes in Gaza, and then there's this other one that like just came out last year. It's War on. I was like, okay, yeah, wicked. Because like you, definitely reading Palestine, and I didn't really get a full sense of this until I had gotten. So I actually kind of read them out of order because I had a little. It took me longer to track down a copy of Footnotes. So I had Palestine and finished it. There were lots of copies of War on Gaza at the local shop. So I bought that, read that, and then I had to wait like a couple of weeks or something to get my copy of Footnotes in Gaza. And it's really only after reading Footnotes in Gaza that I really understood kind of how much Joe has grown as a cartoonist and a journalist. Like, Footnotes in Gaza is a focused, concise. I mean, the way that it's organized, not the parallels, but I guess the contrasting stories of him being in Gaza in 2003, or I think it was 2002, 2003, and the stories that he's telling, the historical events that happened in 1956, how those 2 narratives or 3 narratives really are interwoven. I mean, it's just a really incredible book compared to Palestine, which, you pick up Palestine and read it, it's fine, but it kind of reads like, underground American slice of life kind of, right?
That is super observant because that's the kind of comics he used to do before.
Okay, I didn't know that.
He was doing these kind of like autobio comics, kind of punk rock comics,
Okay.
stuff
Yes.
about going to gigs, that
Yes.
kind of stuff. He did a little bit of journalism, like his background, his university background is in journalism. So there
Yep.
was that, there was touches of that kind of stuff. But then we get to this book, Palestine, which is initially 9 issues, came
Yeah.
out between, he was there in the winter of 91, 92. And it started coming
Yeah.
out as a comic book between 93 and 95, and then was finally collected. But it's a bit like the old punk comics. And even the
Yeah.
art style where everybody's really Muppets. They look like Muppets. He draws himself,
yeah.
especially in such an exaggerated round head. He looks like Ernie, like of Ernie and Bert with these, like, and he's got these huge lips and stuff. And he
Yeah.
chooses these weird angles with very fish-eyed lens, like
Yeah. Yeah.
very curious. And the other thing about it is the chapters are kind of like 2 or 3 page vignettes almost. There's not really a middle or an end. It's just like he goes to some place and this thing happens.
Yeah.
He meets some
yeah.
people in an alleyway. They tried to convince him to take their photo. The end. It's kind of like that.
Yeah. Yeah. The stories are there. The stories are definitely there, but the craft of the storytelling is, you know, he hasn't developed that yet. He's kind of just, he's interviewing people. He's getting the stories. He's putting them to paper. Absolutely. I mean, more than competently. Like it's a kind of a beautiful book in the sense of cartooning and the drawing. Like it's great. Beautiful full bleed printing, you know, and I mean the hardcover that I've got is also particularly a nice volume. But yeah, when you get to footnotes in Gaza, then you see just how lacking Palestine was in hindsight.
Well, I remember reading Palestine the first time, just thinking, like, he doesn't give you any background in any way. So if you're kind of oblivious to this kind of stuff, I don't know how old he is. He's probably 10, 15 years older than us.
Yeah.
So for example, he just starts talking about Sadat. Sadat was the president of Egypt, was assassinated, but he'll just throw out these names. He doesn't give you a footnote. He doesn't explain anything. He doesn't say, there's no background of the Israel-Palestine conflict. Assume that you kind of know that. But also, weirdly, he doesn't explain why he's there for a very long time. You don't know why. The first few pages, he's in Cairo. He's about to travel to Palestine or to Israel.
Yeah.
It doesn't say what he's doing in that region of the world. Doesn't say, I'm here to make a comic about this conflict. Doesn't say, I'm going to try to do some journalism about this issue specifically or that issue specifically. He just seems to be hanging out. In fact, there's sequences where he goes to like a nightclub and he's like dancing with these hot chicks. And it's like, okay, he's just a young guy that's there to party. Yeah. I don't know. And then he just happened to make a comic by chance. But then later on, he does kind of reveal that, yes, he's trying to make a book or something. But it's weird that he doesn't start with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think part of that for me was mitigated by, like, I don't always do this, but the hardcover that I've got has a foreword by Edward Said.
Yes.
So I think that kind of gives you a bit of context, right? It's like so this is a collected book that was printed in, I think it was published in 2024. So it's, you know, it's a reprinting of the collection of these books that came out 30 years ago. So, you know, it's got this foreword that was written in 2023 or something, or 2022 actually. Anyway, so I guess it does provide a bit of context. But yeah, I think if you could imagine picking up issue 1 in 1993 and reading this, it would feel more like one of those underground slice of life books than any kind of journalistic endeavor.
Especially if you'd read his other comics previously.
Yeah.
And also, I think those other books that there's a shift around issue 3 or 4, or chapter 3 or 4, if you want to call it that. In Palestine, there is a shift in approach. And if you read those other
Okay,
books,
yeah.
like Pyongyang by Guy Delisle, those
Mm,
are almost like memoirs.
yeah, yeah.
Like it's more like I went there and I did this thing,
Yes.
where Joe does find a point where he exits himself out of it, and he's interviewing people. And this is one of the most amazing things, is that he, as a cartoonist, he recreates scenes that he was not there for, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
visually, that's like the
yeah.
most astonishing thing about it. Something that you don't really get from a print interview or a print article. Like if somebody had
Mm,
gone and interviewed this person, you would read that person's words, but it's not quite the same as having a visualization of it. Uh,
yeah.
and it's also, it's also interesting. There's a thing that Eddie Campbell used to say. He had this theory about comics. He says, if you don't show it, then it didn't happen in comics. So I extrapolate that to mean the opposite is true, which means that if you did show it, it did happen. And when we get to footnotes as well, it's really fascinating because he will draw a scene. He'll have an eyewitness report from somebody who was there, and he'll draw the scene. So somehow on some subconscious level, we have to accept that as true because we're seeing it happening. But then he'll
Yeah.
find a conflicting report and he'll draw that one as well. So
Yeah.
they're both like side by side visually as if they both happened. It's
Yeah.
really a fascinating thing. And it starts to come out in Palestine as much as it's kind of messy in those early chapters. Once he starts to figure out what he's really doing, or maybe those introductory chapters are just introductory chapters. There's a chapter where he interviews this guy who was arrested. There's a lot of talk about arrests.
Yeah.
Because what happens is the Israelis are able to have what they call, what is it? It's just called detention, or they have a euphemism for it. But they can basically capture any Palestinian and throw them into temporary detention, quote unquote,
Right.
for 3 months with no trial, and then or anything at all, and they're basically just tortured there. We get lots of visuals of this, and but then they can extend that for another 3 months, or then another 3 months after that.
Yeah.
And this one guy gets arrested, and we get it's fascinating the way Sacco draws it, because he goes into a grid. Now, normally he has these crazy fisheye kind of stuff. He goes into like a 6-panel grid of this guy sitting in the cell for hours, tied up, forced to sit on the floor. Sometimes he's forced to, is it another person that they come in and actually dump like buckets of piss on him? Anyway.
Yeah, it's hard to keep them straight because there's that stretch in Palestine where he's really focusing on several different prisoners. There's even that one woman who he interviews that's imprisoned and tortured. But anyway, not to interrupt your point.
So we go to 6-panel grid. And then the next page you go to like 9, and then you go to 12, and then you get these pages that are 20-panel grid. So he's zeroing in, he's forcing you into these walls with this guy. And then the guy reveals, like, oh, I had hallucinations that my daughter was dead. I had hallucinations that my father was dead. And he draws the dead bodies in the cell with him.
Yeah.
We don't know what the hallucinations actually look like. Only that man knows what they looked like. But Joe has extrapolated that. He's created this artistic interpretation of what that hallucination would have been like. And it's absolutely horrific because this dead body of his little girl is he's tied up with a mask over his face so that he can't see or do anything. And there's this dead body lying next to him or on the floor, and the panels are getting smaller and smaller. And then they take him every once in a while, every few weeks, they take him out for a trial. And the prosecutors, the Israelis, will be like, we need 2 more weeks to gather more evidence. And the judge grants it.
Yeah.
Even though they don't release this. And then his defense attorney has a thankless job of trying to defend him. And it's like, there's episodes of Star Trek like this, where it's like some alien planet where the justice system is so skewed. I think it's like the Cardassians or something. I'm sure this is a DS9 episode where like there's no defense. Like the defense is just, it's just for show. It doesn't matter. Once once you've been arrested, that's it. It's done. You are guilty.
Yeah. Then the trial is going to be for entertainment.
Exactly.
And
Yeah, and then finally, when he's somehow magically released a long time later, the panels open back out again, and then you get like a final half-page panel of a street with the sky, and it's just silent. There's no caption, there's no dialogue, there's no anything.
Yeah.
He really comes into his powers of like, how can I tell this story in a way with this medium that's going to make it have the effect that maybe he felt sitting in that room with that guy hearing that story.
Yeah, and that's where he certainly succeeds, I think, even in Palestine. This clearly, I mean, it's not his earliest work, as you've said. He had that background of more slice of life kind of comics, but in terms of telling these journalistic stories, or not journalistic stories, telling these stories of people and their experiences as like they relate the stories to him, and then he's able to craft these incredible graphic representations of those stories and how they must have affected him. You mentioned that scene where the guy comes out of prison and is that, there's suddenly the panels open up, and I think that's something that I that happens so many times in Palestine. Those 2-page spreads or even single-page spreads of, I mean, the mud is the first thing that comes to mind. Like it's just mud, the streets, traffic jams in mud. And it's like, oh, this side of the street is a crater, so they can't get through that. So everybody's trying to go over. There's so many kind of really pulled back views of street. And you're just like, how did he get these images?
Yes. This is one of the most amazing things is the bird's eye view shot.
Yeah.
He wasn't there. He was not at that angle. He has extrapolated that from, I'm assuming from walking around at street level.
Although I'm wondering if he may have snapped photos from like a balcony of a place where he was staying or something, because they're not really bird's eye, right? Like they are kind of in it. But I mean, but still, like regardless of whether he had photos or not, they're incredible spreads, and
they're incredible. And they're super detailed, and I think it's a big question, especially when we get to Footnotes in Gaza, where they can't go up on the roofs of houses or they'll be shot by the Israeli guard towers. Yeah. So there's a in Footnotes in Gaza, there's one sequence where he basically describes, the whole book is divided into describing these two massacres. One was in, what was the name of the first city? Khan Yunis?
Jonas or Eunice. I don't know the pronunciation.
I read these books twice in 2 weeks, and I still can't keep this straight. And Joe can't either. We'll talk about that a little bit too. But there's a scene where during this first massacre, like 100 people were lined up against a wall and shot. So we get a full page, horrifying splash page of these dead bodies along this wall. Or we get I think we get it in modern times first, and then we get a smash cut to the same wall as it was in the past with dead bodies, or vice versa. I can't remember, but that's from like an upper angle as well, and he can see over the wall to the castle that used to be there at the time. So maybe, I don't know, maybe he had reference photos of the time, but I don't know what building. I don't like in all of these overhead shots. Did he try to knock on somebody's door and say, "Can I go up to your roof and get a picture from there?" I don't know. There's some funny bits in there. Like he meets these guys that make furniture, and he's like, "Okay, let's go see the workshop." They go to the workshop, and he makes the guys pose as if they're working on a piece of furniture, like a table or some chairs. He says they're not doing it at the time. He's like, "Do the pose and I'll take a picture." He takes a picture. The panel he's drawn is of him taking the picture. Yeah, he hasn't drawn these guys. He hasn't faked a drawing saying these guys were working on this furniture. He has drawn a picture of him taking a photo of them pretending to work on furniture.
I think this is something that I absolutely love, and that's again that underground punk comic background where it's like everything is meta. Like, I mean, he's telling you the story, but he's also telling you how he's making the story.
Yeah.
He's like saying, yeah, this guy really started to annoy me because he was talking about how I needed to make my comic, and but it's just like, that doesn't need to be in the comic, but it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's written it, he's drawn it, and yeah.
Yeah.
But
That's like,
I think it's a great presence that you never forget
absolutely.
that you're getting this story second or third hand at best.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important in journalism, and it's often, like, I think in mainstream journalism it's almost entirely absent, right? Like the writer should not be visible in the reporting. But in this, it's almost a reminder, and I don't know if this is Sacco's thinking, but for me, it was just that this reminder that it's not an unbiased portrayal, right?
Absolutely.
Like,
absolutely. It's subjective.
It's subjective, and what you mentioned before, where you get like one person told the story this way, and he draws it, and then he gets a conflicting account, and he draws that. So, yeah, you've got conflicting accounts. Even amongst different Palestinians, let alone the Israeli perspectives, which you get a little bit of. But you know, he also doesn't let you forget that he's the one that's telling the story to you, the reader. And so, I think that's a really great and vital part of these books, all three of them.
Yeah, I love that he. I love the moments when he's struggling, where this thing that happens again and again is he goes into these people's houses, he sits down with a bunch of dudes usually, and then they immediately start talking about all the times they've been shot or put in jail. I think
don't forget the tea.
And the tea, and he's forced to drink tea. The women are in the kitchen, they bring out this tea, or the moms, and he's talking with these guys. And there's an amazing page at one point where, I think it's in Palestine, where he's done this so many times he can't remember the names of any of the men in the room are. He can't remember exactly where he is. The captions start falling. They start tumbling in a way that they're running into each other. Now, he does this a lot earlier too, just out of his random punk sensibilities. And it's interesting by the time you get to Footnotes in Gaza, which is the more mature book, he only uses that when he's like literally under like tracer fire or something. Or he's in a street and suddenly there's a riot. Then you get like the captions are cut out on strips of paper and they're falling to the bottom of the page in a completely almost random way.
Yeah.
It's more controlled when he does it later on. But I love that like he gets to a point where he's kind of sick of it. There's an amazing scene where they finally find a guy they can interview about some incident. They've been looking for somebody, and they find this old guy, and the guy finally find one guy that was there, that saw it happen, and the guy breaks down in tears and starts crying, and we see Joe and his guide leave the guy's house, and they've got huge grins on their face, and they're like, yeah, we found a guy. They made this guy break down in tears. They, triggered his trauma. Yeah. And there's another great sequence like this. I don't know if Joe was aware in the moment or it was something he realized later as he was putting together the book, what his emotions were at those times. But a great one is he, especially in Footnotes in Gaza, he's confronting interviewing all these people who've had their homes bulldozed by the Israeli army. By the IDF. And Joe feels guilty about this. He's come from a Western country. He can leave whenever he wants. He's got it pretty easy, even for a cartoonist. And he is like, should I give this woman some money? Yeah. And his guide, Abed's like, no, don't do it. Do not give them any charity. They leave this woman's house. Joe's still feeling guilty. They meet a beggar woman pushing an old man in a wheelchair, and the beggar woman puts out her hand, and Joe gives her some money. Abed's not happy about it. But then as he's walking away, the last panel of the story, Joe says, at least somebody's happy. He's got a smile on his face. So it's not the woman he gave the money to.
No.
He's pleased with himself for his charity in this moment.
Yeah.
More discussion of Sacco's work on the Middle East, including a few humorous points in the books, right after this. This podcast is part of the Deconstructing Comics Network, where we're grateful to our supporters on Patreon. Patrons get exclusive extra content. Pledge $2 a month or more and get Batman 66 podcast Bat Bits and occasional trivia videos. Most recently, we presented trivia about 90125, the 1983 album from Yes. In the next few Bat Bits episodes, we'll discuss early drafts of the script for The Bookworm Turns. At $4 a month, you also get our new monthly show Silver Age Batman, where I'm moving through the book Batman in the 50s, issue by issue, with a rotating second chair of Paul, Emmett, Patrick, or Kumar. Follow our Patreon for free and you can hear the first 2 episodes of both Bat Bits and Silver Age Batman. Check it out at patreon.com/deconcomics, and thanks for your support. Alien invasion is an old trope of fiction, especially aliens who attack humans. But what if the aliens are just living their lives, and part of that involves eating humans? Is that different from humans eating cows and pigs? Hitoshi Iwaaki's manga Parasite explores this question, with some horror and comedy along the way. In the second season of Full Manga Alchemists, Patrick and I are discussing the story chapter by chapter. We hope you'll read along and then join us for commentary on one of our favorite manga titles. Listen every other Monday on your favorite podcast app. That's Full Manga Alchemists.
The other thing I wanted to mention that you brought up was that about how in normal journalism it's supposed to be quote unquote objective. Joe Sacco did a piece for Time magazine around 2001 called Hebron. It was 4 pages. Mm-hmm. And it was his first time doing a piece for Time, maybe his only one. I remember I bought this when it came out because I was like, what is going on in the world? Why is there a comic strip in Time magazine? Anyway, he's not in it. So he talks about that. When he wrote that piece, he thought, oh my God, I'm doing a piece for Time. It has to be real journalism like I learned in university. And he's not in it as a character. And it's probably his weakest piece. And there's a lot of both sidesism in it. Like he tries to give as much voice to the Israeli side as he does the Palestinian side. But the reality is that side, as he realizes later, and he talks about it in his book Journalism when he wrote that piece, and his regrets about it, that side already gets lots of press and media anyway.
Yeah.
Right? They don't need to have a balance in these pieces. And Joe's going in there with a bias. He talks about this in journalism as well. Any journalist goes to do a story because they have an interest in that story. So they're not going in there thinking which side is right here. They're going in there. They have an interest to some degree that they already have some preconception of it, at least, if not a bias.
Yeah.
And that's why they're doing it in the first place. I love that these books are so biased towards the Palestinians. I love that there's so little voice given to the Israelis. You can hear those voices. In fact, he at the end of Footnotes in Gaza, which is a big chunk of it, is about the demolitions of Palestinian homes that were happening at the time along the border, the Egyptian border. At the back of the book, he gives you like 15 pages of text interviews with these IDF personnel, and they sound absolutely ridiculous. They're like unedited, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we've knocked down 45 homes," and then you get the official figures, and it's at least between 300 and 700 homes that have been knocked down. And then they're like, "Oh yeah, those are like chicken coops. They're not actual homes. Nobody's living in them." They're saying it, and they're saying it in a way that I'm not sure if I kept flip-flopping. Do they believe it? Or are they mouthpieces that are saying what they know they're supposed to say? Have they drunk the Kool-Aid? What I didn't know quite how to read it, but some of them genuinely seem to believe we were shot at from those positions. Yeah. And then you kind of scratch your head like, well, maybe it's true, but we've had 400 pages of comics showing these people being brutalized over a period of 75, 80 years. So
Well, I think both can be true.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I forget where it was, but I read somewhere recently and whether this is true or propaganda, I can't say. But I get the sense that at least there's some people saying that there are elements in there are Palestinian elements who are firing
Oh,
at
100%.
Israeli positions, right?
100%. Of course,
And
yeah.
the people who are suffering and the people who Joe are interviewing are not necessarily those people, right? They are distinct from that. So I think that when you hear when you read of those like interviews with the Israeli soldiers and stuff like that, yeah, I 100% believe that they believe what they're saying,
Right.
and I also believe 100% that what they're saying could actually be true.
Yes.
And it's not necessarily mutually exclusive from all the stories that Joe spent 400
Yes.
pages telling us.
Yeah. There's a moment
which is, I guess, part of the problem with the situation
Yes.
is that the Palestinians are not universally downtrodden, good people without any violence in their natures, and
Right.
the Israelis are not cartoon villain devils, right? Like,
Yes.
It's this is humanity.
Yes. What was I going to say?
But maybe I'm jumping ahead to War on Gaza.
Well, there's a little bit of that. Actually, that immediately I thought of War on Gaza because there's a line there where War on Gaza is like a very short 40-page comic. And it's almost like, it's not like the comics journalism. These are almost like editorial cartoons.
I used that exact word in my notes about that. Yeah.
And there's a new introduction in there. I'm surprised this book came out, actually, because as I said at the top, this situation is ongoing. Surely Joe can just keep drawing this stuff. But there's a whole other tangent there I can go into. But anyway, he makes a point that as soon as the Hamas attacks of October 7th, 2023 happened, in which 1,000 Israeli civilians
like 1,200, I think.
1,200, and like hundreds of hostages were taken, many of whom are still hostage. Joe was like, oh my God, that's horrific. But then he knew at the same moment, in the same thought, that Israel's response would be swift, and the word he uses is disproportionate, which is such a non-emotional word for the figure I heard on the Louis Theroux documentary was now 43,000 Gazans have been killed.
Yeah.
That's wild. So it sounds like, I mean, when I hear it, and it's a feeling I had continually reading Palestine and footnotes, is what's the Israeli end goal? I'm not talking about ethnic cleansing. I'm talking about when you arrest a man and force him to make animal noises, which is something that's described in Palestine.
Yeah.
How is that going to stop terrorist attacks? How does that help?
Yeah.
You've arrested a man on no grounds, as far as we can tell. 40% of the male population of Gaza, and maybe also West Bank, has been arrested at some stage.
Yeah.
How is that stopping terrorism? And the one that really is a very long story, I think it's in Palestine, about this woman whose 2 sons were killed.
Mm.
Maybe I can't remember which story it's in. We got to talk about the continuum too of all this shit happening. One of her sons is killed. The other son is like 15. She doesn't want him to go to school the next day. He's like, I'll go to school. I promise I won't get into trouble. And sure enough, later in the day, she hears there's been trouble, and she goes, and the second son has been shot 5 times.
Yeah.
And then they won't let them. The IDF won't let them bury these bodies until the next, like 1 a.m. the next night. She goes to the cemetery at 1 a.m. She's like, I need to get a blanket to wrap his body, and they won't let her get a blanket. And according to her, the soldiers are laughing at her. Just horrific stuff. There's lots of stuff about kids being shot here. And this, again, it's not specific, but the comic, it's about the whole conflict. But I've only ever held a real firearm once in my life. It wasn't loaded. I only held it. I didn't even point it. I didn't shoot it. I didn't even point it. But when I held that firearm, having held that, if I had that in my hand and I was wearing a helmet and IDF armor, and a kid threw a stone at me, a 13-year-old kid, and then that kid ran away, I would not shoot that child in the back 5 times. Like,
well, you're not hired then.
Yeah. Fuck those guys. Absolutely fuck those guys. I could not believe how frequently this was happening. Now, a Molotov cocktail may be understandable that you would open fire.
Yeah. But yeah,
with
children throwing
a child
stones.
running away with their back turned. And now, in War on Gaza, one of the angriest sequences in the War on Gaza book is when he talks about how now the IDF is classifying children as human shields.
Yeah.
So they're opening fire on children.
Yeah.
Like little kids. Because maybe it's true that terrorists are hiding behind them. Even so, come on, what are we doing? There has to be another way. Is there another way? Is it always going to be he shot me, so I shoot him? But now it's 1,000 versus 43,000. And now Trump's saying we're going to build casinos there and it's going to be under U.S. control and we're going to have U.S. peacekeeping forces as part of the regular diarrhea that comes out of his mouth. It boggles the mind. I couldn't keep all this stuff in my head. And as I said, I read the books twice.
Yeah.
This week, and I could not contain all the facts in my head, and I could not contain all the emotions in my head.
Yeah.
And it's a thing that Joe struggles with too. He talks about, as I mentioned, he struggles to keep the names together, but also, especially in Footnotes in Gaza, it's really one of the most amazing things about it is he's trying to do this story about these 2 massacres that occurred in 1956. Yeah. So he's trying to find people that were alive at the time, would now be, at the time of the making of the book, would be 50 years older. And he's trying to find anybody that remembers this, has some sort of clear memories that he's trying to assemble this story out of. But meanwhile, these demolitions are happening. Now, the demolitions are happening because there's this town, I think it's Rafah. It's on the border of Egypt, but there's also a Israeli corridor running between.
Yeah.
And there are tunnels. These, Hamas or Islamic Jihad are building these tunnels under the houses in Rafah.
Yeah.
To the Egyptian side to smuggle stuff, especially weapons and bullets, according to the IDF, but also cigarettes, things like that. They're smuggling in. So IDF is like, okay, we were fired at from that house, or we have intelligence that there's a tunnel under that house. So we have to knock down that house to close off that tunnel.
Yeah.
So that story is happening in the present. And anytime Joe goes somewhere to try to get details about the 56 story, or he's at the demolition and people are like, oh, why are you in Palestine? He's like, I'm doing a story about the massacres of 56. Every single time, the people are like, who cares about that? Look at what's happening to us now. Why don't you do a book about this?
And now, for the listener, in case it's not been clear, this is in 2000. Was it 2002, 2003?
Yeah, both times he was there, Gulf War started. Gulf War 1, the first time he was there, and then Gulf War 2, the second time he was there.
Yeah, that's right.
But his point, the ledge that he's holding on to for dear life is that there's a continuum of events. In fact, there was another massacre in 67. There was also, of course, 48. There have been all these massacres, much like Hindu massacres of Muslims in India. They just happen every once in a while. There's a flare-up, there's a riot, 100 are killed, or whatever.
You're right, yeah.
So sometimes he meets someone, they were like, yes, I was there in 56. They start getting details, and they realize that wasn't the 56 massacre, that was 67. And he very cold-heartedly walks away from this person.
Yeah.
I mean, he's aware of it. But Joe's point is that there's a kind of continuum, like, as we've been talking about, maybe the whole episode, somebody from party A shot somebody from party B.
Yeah.
But why did they do that? Because somebody from Party B shot first. Why did Party B do that? Because somebody from Party A shot first. It's just this constant loop going back through time.
Yep.
And these massacres in 56 were a part of that. Were one of those moments which he could not find. He could only find one footnote about it in like a Noam Chomsky book or something, this massacre. And the UN, after this occurred, the UN observers were not allowed in to see what had actually happened at the scene. They were like, stonewalled by the IDF at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So all that you can't keep it all in your head. And in fact, even the Palestinians can't keep it in their head. As Joe points out, they couldn't keep the massacre separate, or they didn't care. They cared about the fact that they're home in the present. He's sitting there watching bulldozers knock these walls down.
Yeah.
And there's like a military vehicle there shooting at people. He's there.
Yeah.
And he's like, he's like thinking about his 56.
Tell me about 1957.
Yeah. Yeah.
What happened at the school?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's an incredible incredible continuum of events, as you say. You cannot keep in your head. And I kind of came into the recording of this episode. I tried to talk to you about it before we started recording, but you persuaded me to just let it go and let's talk about it. But still, in my head, I kind of had the goal of not talking about the situation, not talking about the current events, not talking about the politics of anything. I kind of set up in my head the perspective is like, not the perspective, but I set up in my head this idea that I wanted to talk about these books because I think these books are an incredible catalog of some of the events that have been taking place since time immemorial. Although I kind of, to break my rule, I kind of like the 1917 starting point.
Yeah.
Joe Sacco actually has 1 or 2 pages. I think it's in Palestine. I tried flipping through to find it. I can't find it. But it's not at the beginning. Yeah. It's like at the middle or something. Yeah. Where he talks about the Balfour Declaration. Lord Balfour, the British, whatever his title was or whatever, but he signed the declaration that the Zionists basically that Britain committed to providing a home for the Zionists in Palestine, right? Yeah. And then, of course, there's this quote.
In 1917, yeah.
This was in 1917, yeah. And, of course, the quote is that this would be a land without a people for a people without a land. And this quote, I think, is so beautiful in its horror, and it illustrates the repeated arrogance and ignorance of humanity who and especially the British. They're not alone, but they are the champions of going to a quote unquote new land and saying, oh wow, there's nobody here, I guess it belongs to the king now.
Absolutely.
Gary Farmer said it best.
Hit the nail on the head. Yeah.
Gary Farmer said it best when he said, "Stupid fucking white man."
Yes. It's I want to get into this. So he does actually. Okay. I think in footnotes he maybe mentioned some earlier dates from like the 1850s or something, or 1820s as well. It just goes back and back. It keeps going back. There's all sorts of people living in this area. There are Palestinians there. There are some Jews living in this area.
Sure.
But the point with the Balfour was like that it goes back to, so first of all, it goes to this religious idea, right? It says in the Bible, the Old Testament, that this is the promised land.
Yeah.
So immediately I'm like, go fuck yourself. Like, really, this is not grounds for killing people or occupying their land. And even if you even then, the Geneva Convention, according to the laws of the Geneva Conventions, you're not allowed to occupy a land once your army's defeated it. It's illegal for Israel to be in there. They don't care. They put biblical law. But again, anytime I hear somebody say this is for religious reasons, which we're hearing a lot now about, like, whatever LGBTQ rights, et cetera, they're always like, oh, it's in the Bible. There's almost always an ulterior motive. I think there are some zealots who might believe that, but there's always some financial thing or something like that.
Yeah.
So anyway, immediately I'm like, okay, fuck this guy, fuck Lord Balfour. But one of my favorite sequences in Footnotes in Gaza is, like, he says, meanwhile. So he's talking about these people that are being treated like shit. These refugees, they've fled during the war between Israel and Palestine. Now they've had to flee into, like, Gaza or the West Bank. Or I tried to look at a map timeline as well, and could not keep that straight as well.
Wow.
Like, it's here's how the borders were in 44. Here's what they were like in 53. Like, they just keep morphing. I was like, I cannot keep it straight what's going on. Anyway, Joe says, okay, let's cut. He says, I have to back away, reader, for a moment. We have to look at what's going on elsewhere. And we go and see what's going on with England and France. And, something I've learned as I get older, or maybe it's the times, the problem is always colonialism. It's always, almost always, that is your root problem. Everything in Afghanistan goes all the way back to the British colonialism. Belgium and Africa, like, you look at everything that happened in Rwanda, all that stuff, you can pass that chain back all the way up to Belgium, right? Okay, so here, one of my favorite sequences in this book, because it was somehow I like the fear of being powerless. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that it's like a horror movie kind of thrill.
Okay.
He reveals that what happens is, so Nasser was the president of Egypt. Nasser had his dream of, like, a unified Arab world.
Right. Yeah.
And the France, has long tortured history with its colonizations in Africa, especially Algeria. Algeria had a rebellion, and Nasser backed the rebellion. So, out of kind of petty notion of revenge, France is like, well, we want revenge on Egypt. And meanwhile, Nasser's trying to build up arms, and he's bought arms from Czechoslovakia. So meanwhile, the rest of the Western world is like, whoa, that's like a Russian satellite. We can't have this happen. But Israel can't declare open war on Egypt, because France and England are supposed to be guarding the borders of these Middle Eastern countries. Like, that's their responsibility. So what they do is these three, Israel, France, England, come up with this plot, this scheme, this secret plan. Let's Israel go in there into the Gaza, start some skirmishes, and then we will. And also, England was like, they had promised Egypt they were going to help build this dam, right? And then they pulled out. So Egypt was like, screw you, you don't get access to the Suez Canal anymore, effectively. England's like, well, we need the Suez Canal back. So they need to shut down Egypt somehow as well. Plus they're getting these, now they've got a deal to get arms from Czechoslovakia. So, okay, so Israel starts, has these skirmishes, and the plan is for England and France to order these two countries, Egypt and Israel, to both pull out. And Israel will pull out, and Egypt will not pull out, because it will threaten their sovereignty if they... Yeah. So the plan is then Egypt will be forced to declare war on Israel. This was also a DS9 episode, by the way. They were trying to force them into a war, and then they can, like, openly attack, and France can get its revenge for helping Algeria fight for its own independence. Yeah. This is a wild... huge machinations that are happening. And then, of course, the U.S. found out about this and shut this thing down and embarrassed them. But
yeah,
these skirmishes happened, and as a result, we get this first massacre of 275 civilians in Can Yunis.
Yeah.
As part of this whole operation, but it was frightening. Like, it was frightening. It sent chills down my spine as like how little control we have over our lives, and all these Palestinians that are killed, these 200 civilians that are killed. Why? Because of these machinations of these superpowers that they can't have no influence on. And
pettiness as well.
Pettiness, yes.
Yeah. Not real like, oh, we're gonna get billions out of this. No, it's just like revenge because they fucked us over when we were trying to trying
to fuck over them. Yeah.
Yeah. We were trying to fuck over someone else.
I mean, Sacco does such a good job of telling you, here's the forces and these alliances are toppling, and it's like so complex and weird, but it's he gives you just enough that you are in shock at what's happening. And then he zeroes back in on these civilians that are being dragged out of their homes and shot in the street.
Yeah. Yeah. Whew.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Take a little water break there.
Okay.
I was worried that we weren't going to be able to get through this without getting overly heated, but I think we've done well.
Yeah. Well, we haven't even really talked about the two massacres, which are the center of Footnotes in Gaza as well.
Well, I think Joe Sacco does a better job of talking about
we don't need
those
to go
anyway.
Through that.
Yeah.
But I do find it interesting that at the end of it, because he has his guide, Abed, this guy he's met.
Yeah.
They're going through interviewing, and they start figuring out, like, and get a sense of which guy knows what he's talking about, which testimony is trustworthy and which isn't. And they become very mechanical about it. They start even assigning numbers to the witnesses. Joe's aware of how inhuman and mechanical this process is, of like,
and it's reflected in the comic too.
Yes.
Like, he kind of has like the very mechanical, like, here's a portrait of the guy. Yeah. Sometimes they've got a name, sometimes they don't. It depends. And he kind of talks about why that is. And then there'll be their little account. Or actually, usually the account is kind of, Joe has stitched it together into this nice, smooth flowing narrative. But like, next to this row of panels, there's this little portrait of this old man that's telling this story, and then on the next line it's this old man, and I mean, it might be more than one old man on each line, but yeah, it's almost I mean, that in itself is not mechanical, but that pattern appears again and again and again, page after page after page, and yeah, it really reflects on the mechanics of journalism. Or as you say, Abed and Joe definitely, they get pretty good at sussing out who knows what they're talking about, who's remembering things properly and whatnot. To the point where at the final pages of Footnotes in Gaza, he starts revealing he's annoyed with some of these witnesses because they've got details wrong, and he's like, me and Abed probably know more about this massacre than these people do. Absolutely.
And he's like frustrated with them, with getting details wrong that he knows can't be true.
Yeah.
And then there's a tour de force sequence at the end of the book where he's driving away. He's going to leave. Yeah. And then suddenly we get a flashback in time. And then we get 2 or 3 pages with full black borders because we're in a flashback. And it's in first person view. So you are the person that's being forced out of your house. Your family is trying to tell you not to leave because at this point, this massacre, all these men were being rounded up at this school because the IDF was supposedly looking for insurgents. But they brought every male of a certain age, from like age 15 to 60, whatever, up to this school. And they're killing people in the street as they go if they're not fast enough or whatever. They just shoot them dead in the street. These are people that are just civilians. And then they get to the school. But anyway, you get this first-person sequence where you're leaving. And one of the most horrific bits for most of these witnesses who weren't killed was when they entered the school, there was a ditch with barbed wire over it, and they had to leap over the ditch. And as they did this, there were IDF soldiers on the other side of the wall that they could not see that would hit them, would beat them with planks, like 2x4s or something. One person says it was steel of some sort. Anyway, that doesn't matter.
Plank or a club or whatever.
Doesn't matter. But the final panel, like as you're going through the street in first person, there are dead bodies around you. You arrive at school, and then this plank hits you in the head, and then you black out. The last panel is black. It's really like amazing, and it's contrasted with that page before where he was like, I'm so annoyed with these guys that can't get their facts straight. I'm ready to get out of this country. I'm going back. I'm going to drive to Israel, then I'm going to fly back to Berlin, and I'm out of here.
Yeah. I think that for me, that sequence at the end, it communicates to us that the facts are not necessarily all precise and factual, right? But at the end of the day, successful journalism, which I think this book absolutely is, Footnotes in Gaza, because the journalist is able to gather all of these, like the composite that is reported is it's a truth.
Yeah.
And I think that at the end of Footnotes in Gaza, the truth that we see in that last 3 pages, I think that's all it is. It's like a 3-page sequence. Joe was not there. He could not have seen those images. The reader that's reading this comic was not there and did not see those images. Maybe no one saw those exact images as they're drawn, but the fact of the matter is many people had this experience, and many more people continue to up to the present day, right? And I think that Joe ties that all in with the 2003, and then again in 2024, that it's still happening, that people are still being beat on the head with planks. And so that's, I guess it's I don't want to say that like that the fiction becomes the truth. That's not what I'm saying, but that the composite of all of the flawed memories and the mistaken eyewitness accounts and the contradictory stories, the composite of all of those is the truth of many humans' real experiences. And it's such a powerful closing to that book.
Yeah. I just want to read this quote from Joe Sacco from his book, Journalism. I might have read this the time we actually recorded on it, but he says, I don't know where I should start reading this from, but the question is, aren't drawings by their very nature subjective? He's talking about possible objections to journalism in comics form.
Sure.
Aren't drawings by their very nature subjective? The answer to this question is yes. There will always exist, when presenting journalism in the comics form, a tension between those things that can be verified, like a quote caught on tape, and those things that defy verification, such as a drawing purporting to represent a specific episode. Drawings are interpretive even when they are slavish renditions of photographs, which are generally perceived to capture a real moment literally. But there's nothing literal about a drawing. A cartoonist assembles elements deliberately and places them with intent on a page. There's none of the photographer's luck at snapping a picture at precisely the right moment. A cartoonist snaps his drawing at any moment he or she chooses. It is this choosing that makes cartooning an inherently subjective medium.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's creating these composites.
Yeah.
Every drawing is a composite. Every expression on a face is a subjective. If he draws some guy at a press conference, some general, for example, he draws how snide, he chooses how snide to make that guy or how insincere his facial expression is.
Yeah.
But that's what I absolutely love about it. It doesn't pretend to be objective in any way. It's like he's there to tell the story of the downtrodden.
Yep.
Yeah. Was there anything else we wanted to bring up? There is a footnote. There's in February of this year, so not too long ago, Joe did a jam comic with Art Spiegelman, which is 3 pages, which was in the New York Review, called Never Again and Again. I'll drop a link to that in the show notes.
I think you shared that with me.
Yeah.
And I read that. Well, you had shared with me a fair few kind of supplemental materials for this. And I didn't get to all of them, but that one I absolutely read. And yeah, that's an incredible little conversation between Sacco and Spiegelman.
Yeah.
And I guess, I think the only other thing, I know we've already mentioned it, and I don't think we need to talk at much length about it, but I guess just to kind of give it its own space here at the end of our episode is War on Gaza.
Yeah.
It's a very different book. You've mentioned how small it is relatively. I think both footnotes and Palestine are over 400 pages each.
Yeah.
War on Gaza is 40 pages.
Yeah.
And it is absolutely not a journalistic work of, collected stories and interviews and stuff.
It's just a work of rage. It's pure rage.
He's pissed off.
Yeah.
He's pissed off. And I mean, it's, what did I write here? It's personal, metaphorical, satirical, and savage editorial eviscerating of the West, particularly America.
Yeah.
I thought it was powerful and cathartic.
Yes.
But not like the kind of catharsis that leaves you relieved.
No.
This is a kind of cathartic experience that leaves you empty and hopeless.
Yes, absolutely. It's those giant forces. There's actually a funny sequence. I should try to locate any funny moments in here, but there is a funny
There's a lot of funny throughout
where he sends in his income tax check.
Yeah.
And he has this dream about how the check is these generals it finally arrives in the mail, and the U.S. Army generals are like, we finally got Sacco's check, that bastard. And Joe Biden's like, we finally have enough for the last piece of this missile. And it's like a little jigsaw piece that fits into this missile, that the missile is then this bomb is then dropped on Palestine. And that specific piece is flying up into this little girl's face about to kill her, that Joe contributed to by paying his income tax.
Yep.
Funny in the grimmest, blackest way.
Absolutely. And I think so this was published in 2024. And clearly when he wrote it, he did not know what had happened with regards to the U.S. election. But there's that beautiful page, page 20, where he says that the American people will have to decide between a president who facilitated a genocide. That does not make Biden unique amongst American presidents. But then the other option is a former president who will, quote, end our democracy. End quote. So, I mean, he obviously Sacco didn't know what was going to happen, but I think here we are a few short months after the publishing of War on Gaza, and we certainly can't look at things and say how much better they've gotten. Yeah, no. And in fact, I saw a thing, again, one of these things just popped up this week, was that Trump's third biggest donor, who donated like $105 million to his campaign, did it on the agreement that he would be committed to the Israeli occupation of Palestine. So that's all kind of, I kind of wish that this thing wasn't just 40 pages. I don't know why he just doesn't, he should be doing them to this day. But one of the reasons it's not as long is because after
footnotes. He did an interview with, I think it was a comics journal, where he said, I don't want to do anything that's heavy again. So he was looking for something lighter. And crazily, his next big book was Paying the Land, which was about the First Nations tribes in Canada and about the residential schools. But that book was done and came out before they started uncovering those hundreds of bodies of children around those schools. And I really wonder if he actually would have done that book if he had known that beforehand, because he was trying to avoid doing anything heavy. So,
that's an interesting topic.
He might have just opted, said, actually, I'm not going to touch that if that had already been, that knowledge had been available.
I feel like that was already pretty heavy, though. Like, I remember when that news came out, and I didn't really think it was news because I thought,
okay.
I thought we kind of knew that residential schools had been pretty rough.
Yeah, we did know that. I didn't know that there were hundreds of children, but maybe I think
the specifics. On. Yeah, I mean the specifics of the sites being unearthed was definitely a new thing, but I don't think that anyway, it's kind of another thought, a conversation for another day. But it's interesting. I didn't know that he had done a book on that topic as well. But
that's a good book as well. But maybe I was just ignorant about it. And he talks about basically in that book, he talks about a lot of the survivors of the residential school coming back and being broken, like they've been sexually abused, then they become abusers or stuff like that. But there's no talk about the mass graves,
right,
specifically in it. My memory is that news, as I would read it, that news came out like a few months or something after that book came out.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So let's tell you, were there any moments that you laughed? I had one or two. There was one where they had and I don't know if you're supposed to laugh, but there was torrential rains. It's usually about Joe. If there's any laughs in the book, 2 or 3 times, it's usually something Joe does. There's been torrential rains, and they go into all the people they meet, that Joe and his guide meet, are looking. Their homes are in ruins because they're almost in mud brick, almost, and the houses are falling apart. The rain's coming in through the roofs, stuff like this, and they meet this old man who pulls a chunk off of a wall because it's gotten so loose. And the guide says to Joe, this guy wants to tell us about his house. And Joe's like, tell him no, and walks away. I laughed at this for some reason. Joe was so sick of hearing it. He's like, I don't want to hear this guy talk about his walls falling apart.
Yeah. That's all everybody wants to talk about is how their houses are being torn down. Tell me about 1956.
Yeah. He was just so sick of hearing about people in there. And there's a point where he reaches these misery limits. And he just has to shut people up. I thought that was kind of funny. One of his, Abed has a niece that's this really cute little girl that bombards him with questions, almost like Uncle Buck. That was a pretty good little cute sequence. It was such a relief, actually, that little moment.
I think that it's not really a moment, but the one of the characters in footnotes in Gaza. What's his name? Is it Asif or I think he's the Ashraf? Yeah, maybe that's it. Yes. Sorry.
Oh, that's the guy that's always constantly joking.
The lion.
Yes, that's the guy. Yeah.
There's the lion, and he kind of goes around he bullies people into talking to you. Shut up! Don't tell him about that. Tell him about what he wants.
You know what?
Great character.
My cousin, I know that guy. My cousin was exactly like that guy. He would go to tourist sites, and I would go there with him in India. And a tour guide would come up, hoping for some change. Maybe not an official tour guide. And he would get out of here. I know what these things are. And he would vaguely explain them to me. Or we go to a store, and somebody would come up, try to help us. He was like, we don't need any help. And he would shoo them away. He was really great at bullying these people like that. Yeah, and he's he's an interesting character, too, because he's always, joking. Everything he says is a joke. No matter what someone's saying. But he does have a moment where he finally like breaks down and says, Joe, what would you do in my situation? He's angry when Joe doesn't have any advice for him.
And Joe has no advice, and it's just like, you're useless.
Yeah.
But I mean, he unironically refers to himself as the lion.
Yes.
Right? And I think there's a few chapters where there's like the lion part 1, the lion part 2, and a really beautiful moment, which is also quite funny, when Joe says goodbye to him at the end of the book. They embrace and then there's like a machine gun opens up nearby, like, and of course Joe jumps and anyways. And
then isn't that the one where like a horse pulling a cart speeds by them and they have a big laugh at this horse? Like they think it's hilarious to see this horse and cart running through the street, panicked by machine gun fire. Yeah. There had been an earlier sequence where he was in the house with Ashraf and Abed maybe, and they're on the ground floor, and upstairs they can hear bullets hitting the walls. Yeah. Like from the IDF tower hitting the walls. And the guys sitting around, the locals just don't care, no attention to this. Yeah. At all, just completely oblivious. And Joe's like kind of freaking out a little bit in that scene, and by the end of it, when that horse runs by, he thinks it's really hilarious. Yeah.
Ashraf and Joe share a chuckle at the horse's expense there. Yeah. But I think there's blessedly, numerous moments of levity, humanity, like the friendships that Joe forms.
When he gets ripped off by kids is another thing that's funny that happens sometimes. So he really struggles with teenagers, and these little kids.
He doesn't like them at all.
No, he doesn't like them. And one time these really little kids show up and talk about they only have a few words of English, and they say, "Come, I show you my house that was shot," or something. And he look, my friend, he was shot, or something like that. And then they put out their hands, okay, 10 shekels or whatever. He's like, what? They're trying to extort money from him. And he's so badgered by these kids that he ends up actually giving them money.
Yeah. No, I think they're great works of journalism. Yeah. But they're great works of journalism that have character and personality that elevates them beyond any. I mean, I don't want to say any other work of journalism, but like your typical news story or whatever. Yeah, because nothing like this.
Because Joe's right there, and often you see how he gets interviews. Usually, when you read an article, you don't see what the journalist had to go through to get that interview, or what state of mind, how suspicious of the interviewer was this local. But Joe shows you oftentimes will say, we'll try to interview this person or that person, that they don't want to do it, or blah, 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 or they have to bribe this person in some way to get them to talk. There's this one old Fedayeen fighter who just will not shut up about all the other battles and stuff he's been in. He will not talk about the 56, and it's driving Joe crazy. They meet with him like 4 days in a row. They're trying to get this info out of this guy, and they know this guy. This guy is hard. Like, this is a guy you do not want to run into. He absolutely looks like he would shoot your face off, this guy. Yeah. And they can't really, they're trying to steer him on track, but he absolutely will not do it. This guy has seen it all, and he's just going to tell his story the way he wants to.
It ends up being like 20 pages of the book, isn't
absolutely,
it?
Yes, absolutely. He has the key details about the Fedayeen. That was a really good sequence, too. Yeah. Okay, any final thoughts that we want to... I'm surprised we did pretty good. I thought we might go 3 or 4 hours, but we're in good shape.
Yeah, we did all right. And final thoughts? No.
Okay, my final thought is Slava Ukraini. That's about it.
All right.
And we'll shut it off there, I guess.
Palestine and War on Gaza are published by Fantagraphics. Footnotes in Gaza is published by Metropolitan Books. Follow us on Blue Sky at Decon Comics. On Facebook, we have both a page and a group. Those are linked from deconstructingcomics.com, as is our YouTube channel, where our episodes are posted every week as videos of a single image. You can comment on our episodes on YouTube or on our site, or drop us a line at mail@deconstructingcomics.com, or talk to us. Click the Leave a Voicemail link on the left sidebar of deconstructingcomics.com. Are you making a comic? Send it to us and we'll do a Critiquing Comics episode about it. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. The music backing the promotion of our Patreon is Change by Jazar. It's a little-known fact that Albert Einstein and Franz Kafka lived in Prague at the same time in the early 20th century and had the same circle of friends. This fact was the inspiration for the graphic novel Einstein in Kafkaland, How Albert Fell Down the Rabbit Hole and Came Up with the Universe, which was published last year. NPR described the book as Alice in Wonderland meets The Lives of the Poets meets Crazy Cat. Next week, Emmett talks with the book's author, Ken Krimstein, and we hope you'll be here then. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.